In this presentation, we're going to be talking about the interview process. If you'll recall, at the end of looking at the general ledger evidence, we had questions from each of the 3 years, 2006, here's that slide, 2007, and 2008. And so we go into these interviews having our hypotheses, having our red flags, having the fraud triangle in being activated in a number of ways, and specific transactions we want to ask about. So the order of the interviews, we're going to start with the person we think is least likely to be involved in any misconduct, and then get closer and closer to the ones that we suspect more highly. That doesn't mean we're going to be right, but we're going to do that in the order. And as you move closer and closer to the person of interest, we try to verify as many facts as we can, and we tell the people as we talk to them, we've already talked to so-and-so and so-and-so, so they already know we've got some facts verified, and that creates pressure on them to be truthful because you have a way to check and see whether what they're saying agrees with the other people you have already interviewed. Notice in your interview that there are a range of certainty in terms of the evidence. So some of the details that we found in the general ledger, our interviewees will verify, say yep. Some will not challenge but won't verify, say I'm not sure, that doesn't sound quite right, I couldn't tell you, but so they don't say oh no, you've got it wrong, and they don't say that's yep, I did that. But there's this middle area. And then, of course, there may be some things that they say, no, you got that wrong, and then you listen and find out what they think the truth is. So how will we respond to these interviews? For the most part, if they verify something as being incorrect, we will adjust the financial statements for that. If they don't challenge something that we brought up as we think it's wrong, we will probably adjust the financial statements for that too. But if it's something that's challenged or that we can't really be sure about, we might just summarize and report those. So in our fraud report, there's going to be levels of evidence. So these things we believe are wrong, and we fix the financial statements for them. These things may be wrong, and we have reasons to believe that they may be wrong, but we can't be positive about it. So as you're going through the interviews, keep that in mind. There's a pattern to these interviews. They start with an introduction, and then you go through the purpose of the visit, and then you're told of the prior interviews, which creates some pressure to tell the truth because you're announcing you already have some data already. You're making sure that the person realizes that the interview is voluntary, that nothing's coerced. And then you start with the least uncomfortable. You say, how long have you been here and how old are you? You just ask for are you married? Ask for personal details. And then job details. When were you hired? What are your responsibilities? And just go through these non-controversial things. And then once you kind of got through that, you've got a little rapport going, then you start to probe in the hypothesized area where you think the misconduct might have happened. And you start with the least controversial, and you move towards the more specific and the more controversial, where you show them a journal entry and say, see this debit to sales? Did you do this entry? See this debit to sales? Do you believe this is correct? And so that would be the most pointed and the most challenging, and you would save that for last. So notice that as you're going through the interviews that are provided for you, the transcripts. So there were 4 interviews provided to you. And so the first one is Sue Bryant, and she was the one that left almost immediately after the death of the prior owner. And so she did not really corroborate or verify any of the errors, but she gives some context as to the massive opportunity and to the rationalization. So we have the main person of interest being irritated at their pay, there's rationalization. Abandoning controls, massive opportunity. Started immediately writing checks. Excluded the knowledgeable party from the board meetings so that they couldn't be challenged. Not having the prior knowledgeable person involved in year-end so they can just do whatever they want without being questioned. So you can see this fertile ground for taking over and doing what you want. And then we get a sense of that the outside accountant and Workmen are buddies, and that they have hired their buddy to overlook the accounting, and that the lifestyle of Workmen changed immediately, dramatically, noticeably. And so that sets the groundwork for believing that the chances are pretty good he is involved. Maybe others are also involved, like his wife and child and so forth, and maybe this outside accountant. So Sue is helpful from that point of view, but doesn't give us specifics, because all the specifics we give her, she doesn't have any idea and can't imagine why it's that way. The next interview is with Anita Workman. So this is the wife, and she has had her hands in the financial affairs. So there's some real questions about whether she's in cahoots with her husband. So, but we get a sense from this interview that she has no control, that she just does what she's told, that the outside accountant just tells her what to do, that the outside accountant and the husband take trips together, not sure how the trips are paid for. They bought a condo together. The outside accountant calls all the shots, writes all the checks. She doesn't see financial statements. She doesn't even know how this outside accountant is getting paid. It seems kept in the dark. And we'll ask Cass what he says about her, and we'll get a sense of whether or not she is pretending to know nothing, or whether she really has been kind of left out of the loop. She's verified a few things. She's verified that the outside services were on their home, so those are inappropriate expenses and should be backed out. She was kind of surprised and confused by the other entries. She does corroborate that the IRA payments were made at Hess's direction, so those are personal expenses and shouldn't be run through the business. So at least two of the expenses we were able to verify were personal and shouldn't be charged to the business. Okay, so then we get to Hess, and he initially claims to have relied a lot on Anita and Tom, and that conflicts with what Anita says. He does admit that the business seems to be doing worse since the prior owner died. He does say that interest on pawn loans are run through the sales. He didn't challenge the $40,000. He thought that that Tom had made a down payment on the condo. Was unclear where the down payment came from. He's not sure how the payday loans or cash are accounted for. He didn't challenge the $45,000 debit to sales, so he didn't give any reason for that or say it was fine. He does admit that the $20,000 posting to payroll taxes was an error. He, interestingly enough, admitted that the reclass of the outside services on their personal home into insurance was a paintbrush, was just to reduce one expense and put it in another. So that was what we sometimes call paintbrushing, or scrubbing up the financial statements so they don't look so bad. So that is the first crack that he somehow doesn't have any conscience about. Well, just rearrange it. He admits that the car leasing was likely not right. He did verify that the personal travel was charged to the business. In fact, he said the IRS doesn't care, so what's the problem? So you can hear directly from him that rationalization coming out. He does indicate the IRA shouldn't have been charged to cost of goods sold, and he does also mention that Tom Workman was living beyond his means, and that he needs a lawyer. So he is clearly indicating that he thinks Tom has done misconduct serious enough that he needs a lawyer. So the question is it all Tom, or is Charles also involved, and is Anita also involved? So then we go to the interview of Tom Workman. That's the most interesting one, so let's look at that. What is really helpful in this interview is we get some data here about the pawn shop. What is the typical activity? And we will use this data to reconstruct as best we can the pawn shop profits, the lost profits on the pawn shop that probably Workman took off with. And of course we're going to put that in the gray category of not being real sure, but we know it's probably not zero. So we'll use these computations here, and I'll show you how to put a schedule together for lost profits, and we'll do that in a separate video. Workman admits to taking the $45,000 as a bonus. He admits to taking another $25,000 for personal use. He admits that the workers worked on his personal house and that the auto lease was for his cars. He admits to charging the business for personal travel. He admits to the $40,000 for the condo. So here we don't have too much fight back by him. He has a sense of entitlement here. In the end, the interviewer says, these ears could be greater than $250,000, and he says that it's not that much. So we're not really sure whether it means that the dollar amount is not that much or that's not that big a deal. So what are the next steps? The next steps are to go ahead and revise the financial statements for the things that we found that we pretty clear are errors, like the personal expenses that have been charged to the business and the cash that he took out and just charged to sales. And then we're going to reconstruct the lost profits on the pawn shop. And so then we will provide in our report the revisions to the financial statements and also to the items that are not in the financial statements that probably have been taken from the business.